And welcome to the Vipercast. We have a very special edition of the Vipercast. This week we're going to go with, it's called Blind Bidding, Lighting Fantasy Football for the Blind. And joining us today, we've got three great members of the community here. We've got Britt, we got Alex, we got Dominick joining us to talk about what it's like to basically navigate fantasy football from a vision impairment standpoint here. All three of our guests are fantastic. They've been doing things that I can only dream of doing. And with that being said, I'm going to kind of turn it over. We're going to hear their stories here, how they've navigated my fantasy league, sleeper, all these different types of platforms that are out there, and how we as a community can help with them and become more enlightened ourselves on their situation. So first, I'm going to head over to Dominick. Dominick, how you doing?
I'm not doing too bad. You know, it's good to be here. Glad that we're able to do this, and hopefully we can get out and help some people.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. I think what we're looking at is for individuals like myself and for Bob here, who's with me as well, is to kind of enlighten us on what you guys have to deal with every day when it comes to fantasy football. Right before the show kicked off, your mentions were just blowing up, and that girl in your phone was going crazy. Like, you got 30 likes here, 30 likes there, 30 likes there. And I can't even imagine how that actually unravels and what that feels like. So can you kind of just talk about what you deal with on a daily basis so that our viewers can kind of get an idea?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it's difficult. I mean, I'm completely blind. I have no sight from diabetes. It's been almost 9 years now that I lost my sight. So I deal, every day with having to, do everything from showering to, brushing my teeth and everything without being able to see anything. And then using my phone, I use the voiceover on my phone, which is easy enough once you get used to it. You heard me doing it, like you said before the show, I was using the voiceover on my phone. So it's easy to do. It's just that not everything's compatible. Like even different websites, you can go to one website and you'll be able to click like an apply button or whatever. You go to another website, it won't be labeled, so you won't be able to use it. And it's the same way with fantasy football. There's a lot of websites like Yahoo that's 100% accessible when it comes to fantasy. But even though their regular website isn't 100% accessible, their fantasy is 100% accessible. And then there's other websites that, are not accessible at all, and you can't even use them.
So you mentioned being 100% blind. Is that something for yourself you were kind of born blind, or is that something I know you were battling diabetes, and I know that's a big part of Bob's something he's championing too, as far as Twitter goes, and diabetes and how that affects the blindness and some other the health complications that you had mentioned earlier. Just a little bit of a backstory there on that.
Yeah, no, I actually had, growing up, I had better than 20/20 vision. I had 20/10 vision growing up, and it just from diabetes that I got when I was 16 and not being able to take care of myself, whether it be from lack of trying and also lack of medical insurance. I wasn't able to get insulins or medicines or anything. So over the course of 15 years, it just kept decreasing. The last job I actually had was in 2012, right before I went blind. I was actually driving cars for a car rental company, so I was able to see up until 2012. And then November 19th, 2012 I went into work, and I just, my sister was driving me to work for about the last month. And then I was using a magnifying glass on the computer, but even with the magnifying glass, when I got there that day, I still couldn't see the computer screen and stuff, so I had to stop working. And then by December 7th, I had my first eye surgery.
And then, Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you here a little bit. Just kind of go through your story there and some of the things that you've faced in fantasy football in particular.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me for one. I really think it's awesome what you guys are doing. So I was in the Air Force. I'm a 10-year vet, and I had 2 years left on my contract. I was also a firefighter for the local city that I was living in here full time. And it happened for me so quickly that I had a brain tumor that I didn't know was there. I started having vision issues where I would get that light changing effect where you would kind of lose your vision for a second, but it would slowly come back. So I went to an eye doctor, and he's like, you have swelling of the optic nerve, so we should get that checked out. 3 days later, I was being checked into a hospital, 6 surgeries later, and I can't see anything. And that was about 2.5 years ago. So I don't even have light perception or anything like that. But one of the things that really saved me from losing my mind, because it was such a dramatic change in my life. I'm 31 years old now. And so I had grown up, I had eyesight for 29 years. I even drove for DoorDash as early as, about 3 years ago. So fantasy football for me was like finding out I could do it was a return to normalcy. And like, it's something I've always been passionate about. And knowing that I could still play without any eyesight was a huge thing for me, because it really gave me some grounding in that sense of returning to normalcy. And I'm not going to lie to you and say that it is as easy, because I mean, there's a lot of things, like if you want to look at stats, you can look at them and see them all. Well, for me, I got to scroll through everything to find it all. Some of the websites like Dominick was mentioning, like Yahoo, is absolutely 100% easy to use. Every button's labeled. There's no issues. And then you get into other apps and you'll have 6 or 7 buttons that just say button, or they don't even say anything. And so you just kind of have to click through things and find out what things are. And it just takes so much extra time sometimes.
I'm really fascinated about the opportunity to get into the optics that, like you said, Yahoo is so accessible. You were mentioning that, and Dominick mentioned the same thing. A little bit later, we're going to get into why Yahoo is accessible and what we would like to see Sleeper and My Fantasy League and ESPN and all these other platforms, how they can change what they're doing to make it more accessible for those who are in your guys' situation there. Britt, what about you? What's your story, your background here?
Yeah, so I'm grateful to still have 100% of my central vision. I was diagnosed at 16 years old with a rare genetic eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. And basically what that means is that I was the lucky one out of 250,000 people that had one of these. Still pretty relatively new eye disease. And basically the blood and oxygen is really decreased to my eyes, and so it kills off my rods and cones. So the first thing that goes is my peripherals. Right now I have about roughly 30% of a normal field of peripherals. So what that means basically think about, those wet floor signs. Those are my worst nightmare right now, because I'll be looking, not thinking they're there, and I'll just knock 3 or 4 down completely unrelated, or run into somebody just because I don't see them. So I've been dealing with that now for about 12 years. I'm not officially legally blind just yet. I would require my peripheral vision to go sub 20%. But the prognosis right now is that between 40 and 60, I'll completely lose my vision. And with this specific genetic mutation, there is no cure. So it's pretty much just a slow bon voyage to my vision. But I'm really thankful I ran into Dominick and Alex, because one of my biggest worries that I have been pushing off is fantasy football, because it's such an important part of my life and something I truly enjoy doing. So it's nice to see that there's still a bit of normalcy after all this.
So then a question for all three, because Dominick, you kind of said it kind of happened over a little bit of a period of time. You've all had your vision up to at least 16 years old. What's the first thought that goes through your head? I know, Alex, you said yours happened really quick. What's that first thought that goes through each one of your heads when that vision is going and you're starting to see you have to pull a magnifying glass out for the computer, or all of a sudden it's gone, or at 16 years old, you're talking, Britt, there, your experience. What's that first thought when that vision starts to go? Dominick?
Yeah, well, mine, I lost my vision when I was 32, so I had my vision for quite a while. But for me, it was just my whole life I've had extreme depression. Since I was 10 years old, I knew I was depressed and everything. So that was part of the reason where I didn't really take care of myself as much as I should have when I was younger. And it progressed to where it was, not just because I didn't have medicine, but because I let it get to that point as well. So it's not, it's not just the medicine's fault. It's my fault as well for not taking care of myself when I had the chance to. So kind of when I was losing my sight, when I got the diabetes, I was thinking, well, this is just how I'm going to, die or whatever, because I never thought I'd make it to 40, and I made it to 40 last August. When I finally did lose my sight, though, I started more thinking of it as a positive and as a good thing, that it, I kind of did everything in my own power to make it kill me, and I thought it was going to kill me with the diabetes and everything, and it didn't. It just took my vision, so there must be a reason why it took my vision. So in that sense, after being a little depressed about losing my sight, I actually that's when I started really looking at it as a positive, and what can I do to help others so they don't go through the same thing that I'm going through.
Same thing over to you, Alex. Do you even have time to react?
Yeah. So like with like what Dominick is saying, like one of the things that like I guess made my transition a little more difficult is that I was in denial about it because my doctors were telling me, oh, well, we don't really know what happened. There's a chance that it's just the brain swelling that's causing this. So you might be able to see in the future. Like, we don't know if it's going to come back or not. And I found out after the fact that that was just total BS, that they just didn't want to tell me the truth about it. Once I did have that understanding, I finally saw another eye doctor that was like, yep, nah, your optic nerve is dead. Like, don't count on anything. He's like, my best advice would be to learn how to be a blind person. And like hearing that, what I started to do was take it as, okay, well, obviously I'm not going to be a firefighter at this point anymore. And so I took it as, okay, well, now you're getting a fresh start to start a new career and really pursue what you really want to do. So I looked at it, like Dominick said, as a positive. And my other thing was like, I don't want other people to go through the same struggle that I had to do. So if I have to struggle to make it easier for the next guy, I'm all about doing that.
And Britt, you said you've still got a little bit of vision, but the peripherals are kind of shot there. The vision's starting to really go. What's that thought? Like, what's going through your head on an everyday basis when this is happening?
So everyday basis, I pretty similarly to Dominick, I had my own several bouts of depression. So I've kind of gone through that, oh, woe is me, poor me type of mentality. And I just kind of chose to view things in a positive manner. So when I was 16 and my doctor said, yeah, you're actually not going to be able to drive anymore, you're completely screwed, I told him, well, go F yourself because I'm driving. This is what's happening. So it took me a while to kind of accept what's inevitable and what's going to happen. But for now, I'm just enjoying every moment of it. Like I'm trying to really take advantage of everything I can, and then just show people, that just because things may not be the best in the future doesn't mean right now is the most needs to be impacted with that. So I'm just really practicing and preaching mindfulness in my everyday practice. It still scares me crapless. And it's still something that I'm absolutely scared about, not being able to see my children's face, not be able to see my mom and dad when they're older, things that are just run through your head constantly, but eventually just sort of make your peace with that while holding just an eensy-weensy little bit of a glimmer of hope that maybe I'll be able to keep at least my central vision or something. So I'm still in the bargaining phase of all this, I'd say.
Something that really caught my attention there, what Alex was saying, is how he had to learn to be a blind person. How do you come to grips with that? How do you learn to deal with it, I guess is the best way to put it. Dominick.
Well, it is a little different for everybody. Like for me, it's a little harder with the diabetes because like learning to be a blind person, you have to learn how to read Braille, which is difficult for me because of my diabetes. I have neuropathy, which is the lessening in the feeling in my fingers, so I can't really read Braille all that well. But then you have to do, computer work like with JAWS, which is the job access with speech program that blind people use to be able to use a computer. It's basically use key commands instead of using a mouse and things like that. There's a couple other programs out there that are starting to get better and they're free, which is good because JAWS is like $1,000 plus like $150 a year to keep it. So it's good that things are like that are coming out, so it's getting cheaper. So you have to do that. And then obviously the orientation, you have to learn kind of like when you're walking down the street, you have to listen to where the traffic is so you can tell whether it's coming from left to right or if it's coming from behind you to in front of you or how, right. If you're at a traffic light, if you're at a curb, things like that. So it's just the orientation and mobility, or O&M it's called. And then obviously the technology, the JAWS and everything. And of course the Braille was very easy to learn. But again, with my fingers being the way they are, sometimes I get like phantom dots where my fingers still feel like there's a dot there, even though there's not, just because of the feelings messed up in my fingers from the diabetes.
Alex, over to you here. Same question.
Yeah, he pretty much nailed it on the spot. So like the difficult part for me wasn't necessarily the Braille, but the orientation and mobility. Because of where my tumor was at, I also lost the hearing in my left ear. So all of the sound that I get is either directly from my right ear or it's actually like going through my head and I'm still hearing it on the right side. If that makes any kind of sense. I know it sounds like black magic, and in the way it is, but all of my sound comes from one side. So there's some things like if you're standing directly on my left side trying to talk to me, it sounds like I've got somebody holding their hand over top of my ear to try to talk to you. So it's super muffled. And so that was kind of the real adjustment for me. But as far as like cooking and stuff, like I know my way around the kitchen, I always have. So it's just finding different ways to do it instead of like. Go ahead.
Sorry. You're a firefighter. You know how to cook.
Yeah, exactly. Like you, as a firefighter, if you're not cooking in the kitchen, then like you're gonna be hearing about it nonstop. And if you do cook, it better be good, because if not, you'll never hear anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we got David. He came in and joined us. He does some work over at DLF, I believe, still. David, kind of give us a quick little history lesson on your situation there. And then Alex kind of mentioned the challenge of once the vision starts to go to learn how to be a blind person, I believe. How did you learn to cope with your situation as well? So I'll turn it over to you. And we've got a special guest waiting in the back room here ready to ask some questions. So,
yeah, so fortunately, my vision isn't actively deteriorating any more than it would for just, as anybody ages, it's going to slowly get a little bit worse. But I was born with a genetic disease called blue cone monocropsia that basically my light and color receptors, to make it as plain as possible, my light and color receptors just don't work, and so leaves me partially, like probably half colorblind, and then about half blind in one eye and a little over half blind in the other. It's a disease that's passed from mother to son. So like in my family, grandfathers, uncles, cousins, everything like that have it, but it's all in the males, and it's pretty uncommon. But they're actually doing research at the Shea Institute at the University of Pennsylvania that they're trying to find a way to basically turn those color and light receptors back on, and they are in approaching the human testing stage in the process that they're working on. And it's right now I'm one of two males in my age range that will be kind of first in line for the testing to just see if it were the guinea pigs, I guess, so to speak. And we'll see how much longer it takes them, because I was thinking about it today. I might actually become too old because they want somebody in their late 20s to mid 30s range, and I am fastly approaching my late 30s. So we'll see what happens with that. But like I said, my vision won't deteriorate to the point where I go completely blind unless something drastic were to happen that would cause it to do so. But like I said, from birth, and they didn't know for a long time, I used to only be able to look out of things with my peripheral vision when I was younger. And so that's kind of what initially gave it away before they could do the actual testing on me, before I was old enough for them to do the testing, is when I would look at things, I'd always look at them down my nose. And it's because I could see real well out here and up here, or real well, relative to compared to how I could see straight in front of my face. But everything around, I could see a lot better than I could right in front of me. And so I'd always look at things out of the side of my eye or down my nose at things. And I had to basically learn how to look straight at things. And that it took some time. And then as far as the colors, pretty much everything that is blue or purple or pink, anything like that, pretty much looks the same. Green and yellow kind of pretty much look the same. Orange, at times in there too, but then orange also looks, a lot like brown to me at times, or, so shades are where I really get mixed up. Like if it's pretty vibrant yellow, I can kind of tell, but it's one of those things that if I tell you something's yellow and you say no it's not, I know it's green type of thing. But the further out the shades, that as you blend colors and stuff, it becomes harder and harder for me to be able to tell that. And then as far as seeing, just I have to look at everything. My phone's right in front of my face when I'm doing podcasts on a live stream. I basically have to try and memorize everything I want to say. Otherwise, I'm, right up in here during the whole thing, face right to the screen type of situation. But just farther and farther it gets away, the blurrier and blurrier it gets. And it's just, I'll never, unless the correction is, figured out and they can run, what they said is they're trying to get it to where you can just put a pill, because with being a genetic disease, you want to get at it as soon as possible. And the only application they would currently have is a needle straight into your eyeball. And it's something where it's a process that people get done all the time. It's not, you come in, they numb it up, they do whatever they need to do, and you walk out of there, an hour or two later, however long it takes. But you can't expect a child to understand that they see a needle coming at their eyeball. It's hard to expect a kid to sit still and just let that happen. So they're trying to get to the point where they can just make it, a pill you take or an injection in the arm or something like that, to the easiest application possible to get at it as early as possible. But yeah.
I was going to say, David, you stick a needle anywhere near my eye and it ain't going in. I'm telling you that right now. I may be worse than a child. Like we're going to be twitching. We're going to go back and forth. I have a hard enough time putting the contact lens in. I used to have glasses and stuff like that. And when they did the laser surgery and they had like prop my eyes open, that was bad enough. Like I can't even imagine that needle slowly, because they're not doing it fast. They're going to come nice and slow for you. If you guys didn't catch on here right now, Mike, Daddy's home. He's in the room with us. Smokey Hell Nelson's joining us. And speaking of someone who's seen innovation over the years, you want to talk about fax machines to now we're talking about accessibility in the blind community here. We've got Bob Harris joining us as well. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing fantastic, Dominic. It's good to meet you in human form, or at least on screen in human form, rather than just typing back and forth. And hello, David.
It's
hey,
been
everybody.
a while.
Yeah, it has.
So, Bob, do you have any kind of question that we could throw towards David or Alex or Dominic here, just on maybe enlightening us as the fantasy football community?
Right. So I guess, for me, my eyesight has been going, obviously I'm quite old, so it's natural. But it's still like horrifying, right? So, the things that you thought the things you were able to do, all these things as your diminishing capacities of all the things I can imagine, my eyesight is among my most important to me. And so I just wonder how you guys deal with that aspect of, the concerns and the fears that go with this, and are there feelings of isolation and loneliness, and what can we do to help when that happens?
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of isolation and loneliness. I feel that quite a bit. Like I said, I've felt that way almost my entire life. And it, like I said, I've been a lot more positive and trying to think more positive since going blind, because I do feel that I've met people like yourself, Bob, or like Justin Lanero, and even like the great Chris Wessling, who I was friends with before he passed away, or, Mark Sessler, Adam Rank. I've met a lot of these great people I've met a lot better people since I went blind than I ever honestly knew when I could see. I think a lot of that in my opinion, has to do with kind of what I call blind vision, where I can't just, no matter somebody says they're not, superficial, or they're not a narcissist, or they're not whatever. You think of the Shallow Hal movie, everybody has that in them to some extent, where as soon as they see somebody, they're going to say, oh, I'm not going to be friends with that person, or look what they're wearing, or God forbid, look what color they are, or whatever it is. And when you're blind, like me or Alex or Britt, you can't see that. All you do is you see the heart of the person, you see the soul of the person through their words and through their actions. And you don't see them. You see them as a person, as what's inside them, not what's on the outside. And everybody says, oh, you have to look what's on the inside and the outside. We actually do have to do that, because we can't see what's on the outside where others can. So to me, that it's given me a way to see a lot more better people. But again, yes, I still am isolated, and it is still tough. I mean, my family helps out, but I've had, like I said, I've had a friend tell me that they won't deal with my disability. I had, somebody who was trying to hire me for a job. I told him I was blind after the phone interview, and they wanted me to come in for a second interview. I said, well, before I come in, I just want to let you know I'm blind. And their next words were, oh, I can't hire you. You're blind. So that was the end of that. So just things like that happen. Or, my aunt saying, I don't know how I can't imagine having to live being blind. I can't see how you do it. Or even when I go to support group meetings and somebody new is there and they're blind, they say, I'm not quite blind yet, but, and I had one lady say, she's like, I'm a graphic designer and I don't know what I'm ever going to do if I can't have my eyesight. I'm just going to kill myself. And she was like 50 years old, and she had her 25-year-old daughter there with her when she said it. It's like, you hear stuff like that. And, there are a lot of people with fear. You just have to have somebody that's there for you and not feel sorry for you. Yes, we need help from time to time, but we don't need you to feel sorry for us or anything. We do need help, and we just need things to change to make it easier for everybody. Not just, the changing things for us could help a lot of people, not just us.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Dominic said. For myself, I think one of the biggest challenges that I face is what other people project onto me. So what I mean by that is like what Dominic was saying, where he met a graphic designer, and she said, like, if I lost my eyesight, I don't know what the heck I would do with myself. Well, by having that fear and belief already, if you were to ever experience that, you're going to make it the worst experience of your life. So a lot of it really comes down to mindset and understanding that you can figure out a problem. Like, you didn't always know how to tie your shoe, right? Like, you learned how to tie your shoe, but at the time that seemed like an impossible task when you're first learning to tie your shoe. It's all about finding new ways to do things and not sitting there with the belief that, well, I can't see what I'm doing, so I can't do it. Like, an example, even just my own parents, like, even though they have seen me do a lot of things, there's still times that they're like, hey, what can we do to help you? And I appreciate the offer, but there's times like they're trying to pour my coffee for me because they don't want me to burn myself. When the reality is, I can hold the outside of the mug and I can feel the hot coffee go up the side of the mug. So it's something as simple as that. If they would just ask the question, I think that's the biggest piece of advice I can give, is instead of assuming that one of us can't do something, ask us.
And then Smokey, there, you could have had a follow-up there you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, actually, Alex and I had a conversation the other day about him going to the NFL Hall of Fame, and how I believe is the tour director, correct me if I'm wrong there, reached out and asked if the experience was inclusive enough, and really went out of their way to make sure that you were being taken care of and your needs were met for that. And I just wanted to ask David, have you reached out to any sites or anything like that, or any of you, actually, Alex, Dominic, to any of these fantasy football provider sites, and spoken with any tech developers, anything like that, on ways that you can increase the accessibility?
Currently haven't. No. It's kind of just something that I've kind of just forced myself to deal with. and there's stuff that you can get to, like readers that, just read what it says on the page for you. But with a lot of things that I'm personally dealing with, like I don't even know how that would go over on a spreadsheet that's, 300 columns and 1,000 rows. Like how I don't even know what that would be like. So it's something that I've just kind of forced myself to deal with. But I would be very interested to hear if any of the other guys have, because like I've been through a lot, like like I said, I'll never, unless something drastic happens, like mine will kind of just stay the way it is right now. But I went to, in my youth, I went to the Washington State School for the Blind, like every summer for their summer programs. And they, we kind of had to learn what it would be like. We had to go through like a whole day, blindfolded, and you do like the guy said, it's something you kind of just learn, like little things to pick up on that, and you remember so much more. Like if you weren't born fully blind and you did get to live a little bit and you without that type of impairment, and you you remember a lot more than you ever thought you really would about your surrounding environment. And so like one of the best quotes I ever heard was, disability lies in the eyes of the observer. So it's exactly how they, ask questions and see what a person can do rather than just assume what they can't. And but yeah, I'll let one of the other guys answer, because maybe they have actually reached out to a platform and inquired about stuff like that.
I mean, it's amazing to me that you guys can remember all these things, because when I get up in the middle of the night, I stub my toe on the goddamn couch. So, and I can see. So I just don't understand how you can make it around the house, basically. Never mind set your lineup.
Yep.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the house. I mean, as long as people don't move stuff, which sometimes they do, and then you're screwed. But as long as people don't move stuff, you can kind of memorize where things are and how many steps you're taking in between doors and stuff. And I always walk with my hands out anyway, so I know like when I get to a corner and things like that. So I do still, believe me, I still kick stuff. I've had my sister come home from work, and there was like a big giant basketball-sized pool of blood on the floor under my foot because I kicked something without knowing it. And things like so. It definitely happens. But yeah, you have to be very careful.
Yeah, and to kind of come back to Smokey's question about platforms like that, the incident he was talking about, you were right. It was the tour director of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I called them before I went, and I was like, "Hey, I'm totally blind, and I would like to come experience the Hall of Fame. I've been there sighted, and my girlfriend's in town, and we would like to come make a show of it because she's never been there." And she greeted us as soon as we got there, and she walked us through everything. She's like, "Feel free to touch anything." I know normally we tell people not to, but it's more of like, in general, if you just let people touch stuff all the time, things will start to get ruined. She's like, "But I want you to be able to experience everything. And if there's anything I can do to make the experience more accessible, let me know." So I'm actually going to try to work with them about putting clear Braille labels on the player bus, so that if the next person, like if Dominick were to come into town and he wanted to go to the Hall of Fame, then there would at least be the Braille label, so he could feel the label and go, "Oh, okay, well, that's Troy Polamalu." And now somebody like him, you're going to recognize because of the crazy hair he's got anyway. But that, and then when it comes to the fancy app side things, I've been in contact with the Sleeper team, starting at the CEO and their head of engineering, and they are pushing out new updates, and I have an open line of communication with them if there's anything that's an active, complicated issue. And Dominick can speak to this too. There is a lot, but they are working on it, and it's getting better. It's still not even close to what Yahoo is, but it's getting better. So they are aware of it and at least working on it. So that's
Sleeper went from probably worst to like second worst, so they are definitely improving some. They definitely have a lot of work to do, but they are getting better.
last I went to the Hall of Fame, they made me keep my hands in my pocket and surrounded me with security. So I'm glad that they're making some allowances for the rest of you. Guys, I'm under a hard deadline. I appreciate Matt inviting me. Good chance to talk to Dominick. Nice to meet you, Alex and David. And next time I'll stick around longer, but now I have to go finish the magazine before I get fired.
Yeah, don't fire yourself.
You too, Ben.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you, Dominick.
So guys, I just want to, sorry, Mike, I just want to jump in here real quick because I know Mac Hammer here, 58's kind of had a question here or a statement because I'm blind accessibility. For me, with ESPN is really great. You were just talking about these platforms. Yahoo's kind of the best platform, I guess, for each and every one of you. Mm-hmm. Is ESPN right up there as well, or is there like a gap, like Yahoo, and then there's a pretty big tier gap if we're talking tiers as far as accessibility platforms?
Yeah, there's definitely a huge tier gap. Yahoo is, you want to say, the gold standard or whatever. And then ESPN is probably, unfortunately, they're probably in like the third tier. Not really sure if there is a second tier at this point. CBS is pretty accessible as well, but sometimes their labeling gets messed up. And for some reason, it's actually sad, but the NFL main website is perfectly accessible and everything's great, but their fantasy website is completely inaccessible. There's nothing that's accessible on the fantasy website. On the main website, it's perfect. Everything's accessible, but on the fantasy, nothing is. ESPN, the draft itself is perfectly accessible. You can do draft picks. You can set your roster in the weekly things. That's perfectly accessible. But actually none of the buttons, or at least last time I used it, none of the buttons were labeled or didn't show the label with voiceover. So you couldn't tell where the waiver wire were, where the trades were, where any of that was. So you weren't able to make any waiver wire moves, pick any players up, trade any players, review any trades or anything like that. But you were still able to set your lineup, look at your roster, and do your draft. So all that was perfectly fine. But any of the in-season functionality was completely inaccessible.
Yeah, I can back that. I totally agree with that. Like you can set your lineup, but if I'm remembering right too, even trying to check your matchup score wasn't something you could do easily. And it's interesting because the draft function is really easy to use when you're in the middle of a draft on ESPN, where it's funny because on Sleeper, like you can set your lineup well enough. There's some nuance to it. Like there's little tips and tricks you start to learn using it a bunch to make it easier. But on a draft on Sleeper, it's very difficult, but the in-season is okay. And ESPN's like the opposite of that, where the draft is pretty decent and in-season you have all these other issues that you run into.
Almost sounds like
go ahead, Mike.
Draft.
Yeah, so sorry, guys. One of the things that I just kind of wanted to jump to is obviously something that the folks here have control over. And, you know, as content creators, we're always messing around with mediums, whether it be live streams, which, by the way, you guys are getting the best of my live streams. I'm a very unattractive man. So you guys are getting the best part of it because my face is literally the worst part of my show. But, you know, other than that, I mean, we have...
That checks out, guys.
It does. It clearly does. So at least you have that going for you. But overall, I mean, we're messing now with, obviously, video content. People communicate in GIFs and memes, you know, TikTok videos. Are there certain mediums that basically just don't translate? And is there a way to possibly hedge that medium? Like, for example, a GIF with some words on it or something like that, that would make the content more accessible for you? Or do you basically just, at the current time, skip over content that maybe isn't as consumable for you?
It's weird. I've never been on TikTok, so I don't know how that one works. But I know it's weird on different platforms. It's different. If I'm on Facebook in a Facebook group, and somebody puts a picture up, a lot of times it will describe me the picture. If it's like a meme or something, a lot of times it'll read me what the words are on the meme. But if it's a GIF, it'll just say GIF. It won't actually tell me anything in it. Whereas on Twitter, if it's a picture, it won't say anything about the picture. Even if there's text on it, it won't read the text or anything. Or if somebody puts an image, like on Facebook, if like Bob put a picture of his little girl on there, it would say, young girl standing in front of a chair, looking out a window or something. On Twitter, it just says image, and that's it. But if it's a GIF, a lot of times it'll say, whatever, it'll say like, Michael Scott office GIF, nice, or something like that. So a lot of times it'll read you the GIF, but it won't read you pictures or anything. And on Facebook, it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, I agree with that. GIFs, like, so for example, one of my favorite GIFs of all time was when Jennifer Lawrence was standing in front of the podium and she had that really sarcastic, like, yeah, okay. So like anytime I see Jennifer Lawrence GIF, I assume it's that one, but that's all it does is give you like the actual, I think it's the title of what that GIF is, like Dominick was saying, where it'll say like Michael Scott office GIF, but you don't know which one it's actually that. Now, memes are kind of the same, where especially on Twitter seems to not really have an avenue to put descriptions in with the image. So Facebook has it built in to where if you post a photo, it'll actually give you a spot where you can caption it to describe what that is. And their software in and of itself is pretty good about recognizing what the photos are. But those are two things that Facebook has added to help out that Twitter, I think, could still adopt. So like the most frustrating for me is when somebody posts an image and they're like, oh, look at my roster, what do you think? Okay, well, I can't really help you because it just says image. And even with the screen recognition software I have built in, I still can't always read the whole roster. So I'm lucky if it reads some of it. But that's the kind of things that make it more difficult to interact in the community when you're just posting an image and not actually saying what the image is.
That's good to know. Like for myself as a content creator that wants to get out to as many people as possible, that's something I don't even think about. So it's nice to hear that. Just so you guys know, at GManJ, he's joined the conversation as well. He's down here in the bottom. And the best part is, I want to piggyback on Mike's comment earlier. We have a viewer question that comes in right now. It's literally going to cover his entire face when I pop it up here. So it's like the perfect question, right, Mike?
Yeah, that's how the best way to get me. There it is. Look at how good I look. I look beautiful right now.
Mike, you look fantastic. Better than you have in a long time.
We can see that my hat looks really nice and my eybraws are on fleek right now.
You got a nice hairline.
Yeah, so eyebrows and hat is my two best features. So this is
you look like Wilson from Home Improvement.
Wilson right now.
Howdy, neighbors.
So Joshua Cook here, he's kind of asking, can you tell us a little bit about how you currently navigate things, researching fantasy football and setting those lineups? David, we'll go to you.
Well, for me, like, as far as not just, I mean, outside of my own research and everything, and I still read as much as I can, but it is something that with how close I have to be, and my face is 6 inches away from the screen and I'm still squinting as much as I possibly can. And with, as far as like websites and stuff like that, the best thing for me would be if everybody just upped the font size and made it bold and put it, the back of the screen was always white and then the letters were always black. But I know that's not going to happen. But that's how, like, if it's reversed or anything like that, it makes it harder for my eyes to pick it up. But I listen to a lot of podcasts. So like I work outside, and so I always have podcasts going, and it kind of, for me, has helped make up the difference with when I do kind of get my eyes do get tired because they do, and I know it's something completely different than everybody else is kind of dealing with, but it's still, reading a lot of stuff on Twitter. I've actually like toned back on Twitter lately just because it gets to be a little much, and I'll start getting headaches and all that other good stuff. So podcasts are something that I tend to gravitate a little more towards, and I just try and listen to as many as I possibly can, just to get as many viewpoints as I can, since there's so much stuff going out on Twitter that it just reading all of it gets to be a little much.
And I guess we'll just toss this over to Dominick. Alex, do you just want to add a little bit more to that, or? Does that sum it up pretty good for you?
Yeah, that sums up. I listen to, like he said, podcasts. I listen not just football podcasts, but just in general. I listen to 60 or 70 podcasts a week, different titles and everything. When it comes to research, obviously I use Fantasy Pros because I'm an expert ranker there, so I have access to their whole platform. So I use them for some. Sometimes it's extremely difficult to move around. Like once you're at a page and trying to find other pages, it's hard to get back to different pages and everything. So it's hard to find different things on there. I use Pro Football Reference as well. But when it has tables, that's when you really have to work with the JAWS because you have to do different key commands. Otherwise, you go through, like you see the table and it has like all the different stats up top, like 18 different stats. And then each number right below it. So you have to remember which row you're in when you're arrowing down, unless you use the key command, so it'll tell you what row you're in and everything. So tables is kind of difficult, but I usually use Pro Football Reference quite a bit. One that obviously everybody loves is Pro Football Focus, but they're completely unaccessible. So I can't use them, which is, I actually emailed him like 2 years ago to find out if they were accessible. And the guy said he wasn't sure, so he gave me a free membership for a year, and it was completely unaccessible. So I'm glad I didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah, to add to that too, like, so the way that I do a lot of my research is like what they're talking about. Like I listen to a ton of podcasts as well. Like I probably have 20 in my rotation that I listen to. If they release daily, then I'm listening to all of them all the time. Like I listen to them while I'm doing other things, like while I'm cooking, cleaning the house, whatever I'm doing. But to add to it, like I focus a lot more on the analytics part of it and the numbers side of it instead of, oh, well, that guy just looks better when he's on the field. And I understand there's a value to that. But since I can't do that, if I only go by what you see on film, that logic kind of plays into, well, if I can't see it, I can't play and I can't be a good fantasy player. And that's just simply not true. So I tend to focus more on the numbers. And one of the other things that I try to do is, if you're hearing something from everybody, that's probably closer to true. But if you have like only one guy is saying, oh, so-and-so is doing great, he looks phenomenal, but he's the only guy saying it, chances are a little slimmer that that is more likely the case. So it's a combination of digesting all of the information that you're hearing. I also do a lot of my own research for some articles that I write. So it's a combination of everything, but I do appreciate that question because I think there's good value in knowing how we operate and that we're not just flying by the seat of our pants like, oh, I like Julio Jones, so we're just going to throw him out there every week.
And that's how, kind of just to piggyback off that, that's kind of why I drifted more towards analytics as well. As when I first kind of got on Twitter and started writing, I included a lot of, the best film analysis that I could do, but it's one of those things where, like, just kind of like I was saying earlier, staring at something for a really long time isn't always the easiest thing. And when you're trying to watch film, you have to watch so much film. And so I, with as far as like Pro Football Reference and stuff like that, what I started doing is when there are those tables, what really got me into like starting doing work with spreadsheets and research with spreadsheets was I just make copies of those tables and then I put them in my own spreadsheet. And like I said, I bump up the font like tremendously. Like a person who has 20/20 vision, probably, they're probably going to look at it and be like, holy crap, that's way too big. I can't even, you got to scroll so much to see everything. But making everything bold and as dark as possible. In a lot of cases, like I've been told, like when I put out a spreadsheet or something on Twitter, too much, people are like, oh, it hurts my eyes, there's too much color. And I'm like, I'm sorry, the color is kind of for me because I need, when I'm looking through something, if I'm looking for a specific column or whatever, I highlight it. I put something bright and vibrant so like I notice it really well. And so that's kind of how I started drifting more and more towards the analytics side. And I still love to watch football and I watch as much as I possibly can, but about 95% of my analysis is all based on numbers.
And then Jay, you just want to kind of jump in here, and I know you had a question you wanted to get out there.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on and giving me the opportunity to ask this question. So I do a little bit of everything, podcasting, writing, but this is specifically for articles. Is there any sort of common abbreviations or shortcuts that are in a lot of articles that for, somebody with good vision that can read, it's fine, but that doesn't necessarily translate with software or anything like that? That it's, not only just abbreviations, but formatting, anything that doesn't translate well that you see commonly in a lot of different articles that would be an easy fix for us to do that would make things easier for you guys.
I personally, I would say no, only because it does pretty much read out. It'll say int, and sometimes if you have it too fast, you'll think you're hearing a different word, but then you can go back and arrow through letter by letter to get it. Okay. The ones for me that kind of get messed up, and it doesn't happen except if you're in like a group chat with somebody, is like if somebody's, and I'm not going to say it, but we'll all be able to figure it out, where if somebody's referencing Kareem Hunt and they just use the first letter of his first name and then his last name, and it reads it. Okay. So it's just, things like that or whatever. So it's like, so that in that sense, sometimes it's a little weird, but who they're talking about and everything. But for the most part, if you can't figure out a word or whatever, you can just arrow through it.
Okay.
Yeah, I do agree. And I appreciate that question. And that's the main thing that I see to run into, because sometimes voiceover, if I'm using it, or JAWS, when it gets to the name, it doesn't always pronounce it the right way. So I have to go by character to spell it out. Oh, okay, that's who they're talking about. But I actually took the time to go through my phone, and it's something that anybody can use. Is you can have it to where if it sees two initials like TD for touchdown, for example, anytime it sees TD, it'll say touchdown or convert it to touchdown for you. It's in like your keyboard shortcuts. So that's something that I actually went through and did, because I'm looking at so much football content. Like I have INT, it reads it as interception. TD, it reads as touchdown. REC is reception. So like I went in and put all of those in there. So if you do put that in an article, it'll actually read it to be the way that he would perceive it by looking at it.
Okay.
So I kind of want to jump in on this too, because you all write articles, you all put it out there. I'm assuming talk to text is kind of where you want to go with this when you put these articles out. I've had Bob talk and text to me, and I can't understand a thing that he sent me. It's got like a Boston accent when he talks. None of the words line up. It's like my 3-year-old texting me. How do you guys deliver a great article?
Well, when it comes to articles, I'm assuming Alex does the same way because it's with JAWS. We don't use type to text. We actually type the article just like you do. And then what the JAWS does is every time we type in a letter, it tells us what letter we typed in. And then when we hit the space bar, it says space bar. And if we hit shift, it'll say shift. And then it'll say like capital S if we're putting the S in and things like that. And then if we arrow up to the line before, it'll read us the whole line. Or if we arrow down, it'll read us the whole line. The only time I use talk to text or dictation is if I'm sending a tweet, or if I'm in like if you see some of my words come through wrong on like a group chat in Twitter or whatever. I use when I'm doing stuff on my phone, I always use talk to text. But when I actually do all my articles, I always use the JAWS, which is just a regular word for the regular Microsoft Word, typing it myself.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do too. If it's informal communication or just like with friends or people that you're just talking to, I'll use dictation for that sometimes because it's just a lot faster. But if it's an article or something that's going to be quote unquote published, that's when I'm just going to type it out and do the actual work on it, run it through like spell checker. And then sometimes not sometimes, every time, I'll also have somebody proofread it to make sure I don't have any crazy capitals in there and stuff, because it takes time if you're trying to go through every single character.
And yeah, that's the other issue is everybody and their mother uses Grammarly. I'm sure you all use it for your articles and stuff, but Grammarly is not accessible for the blind. And I emailed them actually and said, do you have a plugin to make it where it's not visual? Because right now, it'll put like a red line or whatever under words that are wrong. It'll put green line under ones that just need to be grammar a little bit, and then you can go through and change it. And I asked them if there was like a plugin they need, and their response to me was, "No, we're not accessible. We have no plans on becoming accessible in the future."
Yeah, that's the worst.
That's not cool.
So I know, David, go ahead. I think you're on mute there.
You're correct. I was. I was going to say pretty much the exact same. Like if I'm doing anything on my phone, I just talk it into it. But if I'm writing an article, same as the guys, I actually type it out. And yeah, that's crazy to hear about Grammarly, because I do rely heavily on it because I still can. I still do have partial vision. So when the visual cues do pop up, I can notice them. But that's extremely unfortunate.
And yeah, that was about 3 years ago. I did get a hold of them again this year, and now they claim that they're thinking about trying to work on it if they get more people that need it.
Man, that's that makes me kind of not want to use Grammarly anymore. But yeah, hopefully they figure it out.
I think with any new innovation there, like we're talking Grammarly, and there's going to be some bumps along the way when they convert over there. There's going to be some complications. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations that we're having right now. Alex, Dominick, David, jumping in here, kind of giving us a little bit of an insight onto what you guys are facing on an everyday basis. Hopefully things are starting to trend in the right direction. Like you mentioned some great innovations there, JAWS and stuff like that. Just want to kind of leave here on a note here. I think we could do a 2-3 part series on this whole thing when it's all said and done. But just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, what is that one thing? I'll go to each and every one of you, starting with Alex. What's that one thing that you want the viewers to take away from this show more than anything else? Alex. Alex, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
All right, we'll come back. Okay, Alex, go ahead.
I got it there. Yeah. So the biggest takeaway that I want people to have is, I think David actually said it best, with disability is in the eye of the observer. So don't just assume that we can't do something. Ask us if we need help. If we say no, accept that answer, because that's also something that I know I personally have experienced. I'm sure Dominick has too, where somebody will ask if you need help and you say no, and then they force their help on you. Like, why'd you ask me if you're just going to make me go with what you're saying? But the big thing too with fantasy football, to kind of bring it back to that, is that it's a great way for people to come together. So if you see that you're getting your butt kicked by somebody and their screen name is the blind guy, just know that it's me, and I can't see, but I'm still better than me.
Dominick,
Perfect.
over to you.
Well, yeah, I think it's great when we have places like Yahoo that are really working on it. Like I said, they actually have a couple. One reason Yahoo is very good is because they actually have an all-blind fantasy football league that they host every year, and then they get feedback from them after every week of what they need to fix or what they don't need to fix and what's working good and everything. So they've been doing that, I think, for like 4 or 5 years, and I actually just got into the league this year. But just getting it out there, and podcasts like this and panels and everything else, and getting more people involved in it is really what is going to be the key. And I'll just leave it with something that Kirk Herbstreit said on College Game Day last year when he was talking about the Black Lives Matter stuff is, things aren't going to change until the people who aren't affected by it are as outraged as the people who are affected by it. And it's good that people are starting to really be aware of it. And that's the only way things are going to change is if, people like yourself who aren't affected by it actually help to get it changed.
David, over to you.
Yeah, I think they just to reiterate exactly what they both said. It's something that they don't just assume. Even throughout my life, people have always assumed that I needed some help, and I'm able to still partially see, and the questions still coming. Like I got sat in the front of the classroom because they thought it would help me, and I told the teacher every single time, like, unless you're writing letters that are 3 foot tall, this doesn't do a thing for me. So don't single me out and make a point to like, hey, he's in front every single time. Like, like unless we're at, you can ask for help, but unless we like say yes or something like that, like both guys kind of said, it's something that, just like I don't know, like anything else. They both said it great, and
And don't be that one of those people that, and there's a number of them. I don't know if I haven't. Luckily, I haven't been have to deal with one of them, but I've heard stories about people like blind people like myself or Alex using like their cell phone when they're walking down the street or whatever, and somebody says, "You're not really blind. You're using a cell phone. How can you say you're blind if you're using a cell phone? You're faking it."
See, that's the one I got to deal with all the time, because I could get around and stuff like that, and people, I've been told that I'm trying to get attention or want people to feel bad for me, and it's like, you really think that I want to stand out for like something like that? Like it's not something that you go around trying to make everybody aware of. You try and live your life and do it to the best of your ability, and you work over the humps and you get around the bends that you need to get around. And but yeah, it's even for me using a phone or anything like that, it's still, even though I can see, it's still something that's extremely difficult.
And Bob, I'm going to send it to you here for the last question here.
I don't have a question. I mean, well, I do. It's kind of a follow-up from a question earlier on. So as a graphics guy, obviously you guys don't see my work. Now, Twitter has the underlying text that you can write what the picture is about. Has that helped in the past, or has anyone ever done that you've tried that out?
I've never seen it. People may have done it. I've never seen it. Like I said, the only time I've ever seen anything on Twitter that it actually read any type of thing to me is when it's like a GIF where, like I said, it'll say like Michael Scott Office GIF or The Rock WWE GIF or something. That's the only time I've ever seen it on Twitter.
All right. So I have found out how to underwrite the image. So I want to try that out, and we can try that out, later this week or something. I'll send it right to you, and Alex. But I'm curious because that might improve from what I do to help you guys.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, I'll definitely be looking out for that, Bob. You know that we're.
I'll just directly tweet it to you guys.
Okay.
Awesome.
So I kind of want to set on an outro here because I find it fascinating because all three of you, and I know Britt does some podcasting too on the side, but you all work or you do your writing or your fantasy analysis can be found somewhere out there. And for those who are viewing, maybe someone who's blind and might have that the mental health aspect kind of kicking in. I can't do that. I can't do this. All three of you are doing things in the fantasy football community. So Alex, I'm going to turn to you, then we're going to Dominick and then David. Just let everyone know where they can find your work, where you're at, and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I can be found on Twitter at TheBlindGuyFF, no spaces. And I do my articles. I write. As of now, I'm writing for DynastyProsFootball.com, and I am actually working on starting a podcast that will be coming out here in the next probably week or two as soon as my new microphone shows up. I'm also on Clubhouse. It's the same screen name at TheBlindGuyFF, so if anybody's on Clubhouse, you can find me there, usually in the fantasy football rooms. And I also just want to say thanks again, guys, for doing this because this is how you start to make changes happen.
Yeah, this is really awesome. I'm glad we were able to do this. I have my own website, fantasyhotread.com. Right now, I'm not sure if that's going to keep going or not. I haven't done anything on there for a while, but I still write for rotoballer.com. I've done hundreds of articles for them. I just got a special commission, if you want to call it that, footballguys.com, which is actually a great, and they're actually really accessible if you need to use somebody. They asked me to do 2 or 3 articles for them over the summer as like a special correspondent. So I'm going to be doing stuff for them, and hopefully I'll be working somewhere soon. I had a phone call with USA Today earlier today. I've been in contact with the NFL as well as CBS and a couple other places. So I'm hoping to find something full time. But other than that, right now I'm just working on my health, as Bob and everybody here knows. I'm going through my have to start dialysis soon. I just found out today that I am officially on the transplant waiting list for a kidney and a pancreas. So I'm going to have to do that as well as get a cardiac catheter. So right now I'm just dealing with all my other health issues, but I'm still going to be writing, weekly. I still have another couple articles coming out soon.
And then
I'm at Wilsonator on Twitter, WILLSON8TOR, and then I write and podcast for DynastyLeagueFootball.com, and my podcast is the Four Corners Fantasy Podcast, and then I getting ready to start here soon. We'll get rolling on 2021 projections. I built a pretty extensive running back model that has done pretty well in the first couple of years for projecting draft capital for the last 2 classes, and just trying to. I did a little bit of work for a couple different draft kits or a couple places this year, and just doing as much as I can while still taking care of 3 kids and a couple animals.
Yeah, I don't know if I've noticed the cat there in the background a couple times hanging around by the couch there. He's been checking out the show a little bit, kind of looking over his shoulder.
We that's our young one. We actually had to put our 12-year-old down yesterday. She just getting too old, so we're down to 2, a dog and a cat now, and down from 2 dogs and 2 cats like a year ago. So it's been a tough one the last year. So
I guess my biggest question now, David, for you in particular, how many cups of coffee are you in already today?
Well, so this one right here would be. I worked today out of the house. When I'm at the house, it's generally a little bit more, but I've probably had about 7.
That's good. See,
that's kind of low.
When I talk to David, it makes me feel better about my coffee consumption because he's right up there with me, so I don't feel so bad.
See, like
I'm on 12, so
tomorrow I always wake up before everybody because it's kind of my time to do all my football stuff before the whole family gets up, and I'll go through a whole pot by myself before my girlfriend gets up. So
I usually drink one decaf from Dunkin' Donuts a day.
Yeah, oh man, that's where I need to start trending eventually.
extra large decaf with 5 cream and 3 equal.
Man.
That'll do it. That'll get your morning going.
Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate you coming on.
David, Dominick, Alex, Britt, who's in here earlier, thank you very much for kind of enlightening us a little bit on your guys' everyday life. And I'm hoping we keep this conversation going. I just wanted you guys to let you know, I don't know if you didn't see the numbers and stuff, but at one point, your stories were being heard from about 450 people. Dominick, Matt Berry a little bit there. He retweeted the link out, and the numbers just went through the roof. So a lot of people were hearing this story tonight, watching and listening in, and hopefully we keep that conversation going because that's the most important thing. You mentioned that, getting that conversation started and seeing where we can push it and going forward. So without you guys, this conversation doesn't get started. Without Bob and you guys' chat room and clubhouse, we probably aren't having this conversation on this podcast in particular. So thank you for sharing some of that with me.
Yes, thank you very much for having us. It was great.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, guys.
And with that, this is the Vipercast blind bidding, lighting fantasy football for the blind. Thank you. And I'm sure there's going to be a part 2 coming out soon because I think we just touched the surface of this conversation. Good night.